This week on The Inside Story, Xi and Russia, war in Ukraine. Fresh into his third term leading the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping visits his Russian counterpart in Moscow. What does this mean for Russia's war in Ukraine? And is Ukraine making new friends in the West? Plus, the International Criminal Court issues a warrant for the arrest of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Will war crimes be punished? Our reporters bring you the inside story. Xi and Russia, war in Ukraine.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Lee in Washington, D.C. This week, Ukraine dominated the international news cycle. In Moscow, the leaders of Russia and China met to present a peace plan for Ukraine and display the strengthening alliance between the two nations. Leaders in the U.S. and Europe are openly skeptical of China's role as a neutral mediator and are promising more ammunition and money to Ukrainian fighters. Talks between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping focused on Beijing's plan to end the war as Moscow's offensive stalls around the contested city of Bakhmut. Because Russia's war in Ukraine has dragged on for more than a year, a peace plan put forward by an ally could allow the Russian president a way out of the war. But another key takeaway from the meeting between Putin and Xi, the image of Chinese and Russian leadership clearly aligned and seemingly on a path to deepen their relationship. VOA's Patsy Widakutswara has our lead story this week.
In Moscow, a red carpet treatment and state dinner hosted by Russian President Vladimir Putin for Chinese leader Xi Jinping.
As permanent members of the UN Security Council, China and Russia will continue to work with the international community to firmly safeguard the basic norms of international relations based on the purposes and principles of the UN Charter.
Xi called for a diplomatic solution in Ukraine that Putin says he supports.
We believe that many points of Chinese peace plan are in sync with Russian approach and could form a basis for a peaceful settlement when the West and Kiev are ready for it. However, we are not seeing any such readiness on their part.
The White House rejected Putin's claims.
We haven't seen anything that they've said, they put forward, that gives us hope that this war is going to end anytime soon.
Before the Putin-Xi meeting, the U.S. warned against a Chinese-brokered ceasefire, saying it would ratify Russia's gains in Ukraine. John Kirby said the U.S. would only support Beijing-brokered talks if President Volodymyr Zelensky believed they would lead to a just peace. For the Ukrainian leader, that means no concessions on territory annexed by Putin.
I doubt that the Russians would agree to that condition. They've already rejected it as something that they don't regard as any kind of a starting point for negotiations.
Zelensky met Tuesday with Fumio Kishida. The Japanese prime minister was the latest leader in the Western alliance to make a surprise visit to Kyiv.
Given Japan's strength, its leadership in Asia in defending peace and the rules-based international order, and Japan's responsibility as the G7 chair, our talks today can truly yield a global result.
After his meeting with Putin, a call between Xi and Zelensky may also take place, but it has not been confirmed. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
Ukrainian authorities have called for a war crimes investigation after a video surfaced on social media that appeared to show Russian soldiers killing a Ukrainian prisoner of war. But how would this alleged crime be prosecuted? Alexei Kovalenko tried to find out.
On March 6th, a graphic video appeared in social networks that seems to portray Russian forces killing an unarmed prisoner of war wearing a Ukrainian military uniform after he says quietly, "Slava Ukraini," glory to Ukraine. Ukrainian authorities are urging the International Criminal Court, or ICC, to investigate. Later, Andriy Kostin, Ukraine's prosecutor general, said an investigation was launched by Ukraine regarding the killing of an unarmed POW. Ukraine's armed forces say the man who appeared to be executed was sniper Oleksandr Matseyevsky. U.S. experts believe the video could serve as proof of a war crime committed by Russian forces in Ukraine.
Clearly suggestive evidence of a war crime being committed, and clearly this film will make its way into the investigations underway not only by the International Criminal Court, but also by Ukrainian courts that will look at this crime, determine which military units were in that area at that time, who commanded them.
British lawyer Wayne Jordash, head of the Mobile Justice Teams, a collective of international investigators supporting Ukraine's Office of the Prosecutor General, says the courts must determine whether the war crimes allegedly being committed can be legally classified as genocide.
It is almost certainly a crime against humanity. The only question that remains is whether it was genocidal, and that is going to take a bit of time to assess.
Professor Jennifer Trahan with NYU's Center for Global Affairs believes the video of the killing is yet another reminder of why an international tribunal is needed to investigate Russia's war crimes in Ukraine.
If we didn't have the aggression, we would have none of the crimes against humanity and war crimes. We wouldn't have the crimes in this horrific video, and we would have none of the killing and the harm. So it is a reminder why we need this tribunal.
Experts may disagree about how the war crimes being committed should be investigated and prosecuted. Evidence like the execution video leaves little doubt that some kind of international investigation is called for. For Alexei Kovalenko, Arash Arabasadi, VOA News, Washington.
With the war in Ukraine and Chinese saber-rattling near Taiwan, what's clear is that while the U.S. is still the world's superpower, the combined might of a Russian-Chinese alliance could present significant worries for American military and political planners. Over the 2 years since Russia began its invasion of Ukraine, thousands of civilians and military personnel have been captured and imprisoned. Now released through a prisoner exchange program, some are taking refuge here in the United States. VOA's Tatiana Voroshko has the story of two former prisoners of war who are speaking out to aid those still being held captive.
Since Russia invaded Ukraine, about 2,000 Ukrainians, both soldiers and civilians, have been captured and released as part of prison exchanges. Two Ukrainian women, a volunteer and a combat medic, came to the U.S. to tell their story after they were released following a prison exchange with Russia.
I spent almost the whole time with a bag on my head, even inside the cell. In the cell, windows are painted white, so you can't see anything and don't know what's going on outside. Any rustle, any knock on the door, and I had to put the bag back on my head and turn to face the wall. I wasn't allowed to sit or lie down from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. I had to pace or stand. Once I got so tired, I climbed into bed a few minutes before 10. They threw me down and started beating me. There, I could always hear screams of men and women being tortured.
Lyudmila Husseinova was detained in the Donetsk region in 2019 after the city residents complained about her pro-Ukrainian stance. The next 3 years she spent at a Donetsk detention center with criminals.
I slept next to women I didn't know. One had tuberculosis. The other was also sick. That's where you sleep. There's also a hole in the ground covered with a cloth. That's the toilet. You bathe there as well. Do dishes there too.
In October 2022, Husseinova was released during a women prison exchange. In April 2022, combat medic Anna Olson was in Mariupol and had almost 1,000 wounded in her care. When her brigade surrendered, she spent months in prisons in Olenivka, on the occupied territory in Ukraine, and in Russia. in Taganrog, Kursk, and Belgorod region.
In Taganrog, it was the worst. There we suffered the most physical and emotional pressure and torture.
Russia has repeatedly refused to directly address any incidents of mistreatment of prisoners, alleged war crimes or torture. Moscow has labeled them fake news or even, in some cases, staged attempts by the Ukrainians to discredit Russia. But it also talks about the many violations of the Geneva Convention regarding the handling of prisoners of war committed by Russians: torture, refusal to provide medical assistance, psychological abuse, and malnutrition. Now the two women are pushing to create a special mechanism that would free Ukrainian civilians from Russian captivity.
The Geneva Convention ensures the possibility for the exchange of prisoners of war, but there is no such mechanism for civilians that are also in captivity.
Create such a mechanism. Help us save men and women that are still there. There are prisoners who have been there for 2, 4, 5 years, many more since the start of Russia's invasion.
According to Ukrainian authorities, in late 2022, some 3,400 Ukrainian citizens were in Russian captivity, 40% of them civilians. Tetiana Voroshko for VOA News, Washington.
Recently, VOA's Misha Komodovsky sat down with the former president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, who served from 2014 until 2019. We asked him about his pre-war criticism of President Vladimir Zelensky, what Ukraine needs from the West, and how China might play a role in ending the war.
On the first hours of full-size invasion, I called to President Zelensky and asked for an urgent meeting. And my message was, I am not, since this moment, I am not the leader of opposition anymore, and you are not anymore my opponent. And if we're talking what is the great achievement since the 24th of February, great achievement is a unity. And I think that unity is together with the weapons, together with the sanction, together with the justice against Putin, together with the financial support, and together with the future membership of Ukraine in NATO. At the moment of our victory, the unity and global solidarity and global partnership is the key factor for that. And now, the global unity, global solidarity with Ukraine, and total and complete isolation of Russia. This is also the key factor for the sustainable security situation on the continent, is a key factor for our victory, is a key factor for our peace. And I'm proud that me and my team create the armed forces of Ukraine, and definitely now we have proved that this is one of the best, or maybe, or probably the best in the world. We, in the year 2014, win the battle for creating the armed forces. Today, my conclusion from the long years experience for negotiation with Russia is 3 points. Point number 1 is don't trust Putin. Point number 2, please do not be afraid of Putin. And this is the fact which Ukraine, me, armed forces of Ukraine demonstrate since year 2014, because Putin understands only one language, and this language is a language of strength. And point number 3, we have already a brilliant negotiator, very efficient. We have a great negotiation while Putin tried to encircle Kiev, while he fought for Kharkiv region, during the operation in Kherson. The best diplomat, best negotiator is armed forces of Ukraine, with the support of our partners, including our global leading role of the United States administration with the leadership of the President Biden, United States Congress, and very important, United States people. Many of my team, many of my close friends now is in Bakhmut. And this is direct message I want to deliver to you from them. have a lack of ammunition. And any delay of ammunition supply, any delay of the armed personnel carrier, air defense, long-range artillery, a long-range missile, any suspend would not affect it only on the April counter-offensive operation, but this is the fact which Ukraine pay very high price in Bakhmut on the whole front line. Everybody should understand that the key from the peace, definitely not in Washington, not in Kiev, and even not in Beijing. The key from the peace is in the hands of Putin and Moscow. The role of China can be absolutely decisive. And if we have an opportunity to use the Chinese factor, we definitely need to do that as soon as possible. We, at the same time, shouldn't allow any attempt to supply weapons to the military criminal, to Mr. Putin. And with this situation, I think that the document which Chinese present is not a peace plan, actually. This is the 12 points. This is the call for the process. And I definitely recommend that China should be involved in the process. It is vital that the President Xi visit Kiev, visit Ukraine. And that would have a great, not only symbolic, but efficient importance. It would be extremely efficient if a meeting with the Ukrainian president taking place. And I think let's together motivate China to follow this way.
Moldova is a country divided over concerns pertaining to freedom of speech and national security. Government officials there, aware of the use of propaganda in the war between Russia and Ukraine, are looking to halt efforts by the Kremlin to do the same in their nation. VOA's Ricardo Marquina has the details.
Moldovan President Maia Sandu takes on a serious tone as she addresses her nation. The government of this small country believes that Russia, a year after starting an expansionist war in Ukraine, has a plan to force a violent change in power here.
The purpose of Russia's actions are to overthrow the constitutional order, change the legitimate government in Chisinau to an illegal one, which would put our country at the service of Russia.
Moldovan society is deeply divided between Romanian speakers, historically linked to Romania and Europe, and Russian speakers who maintain strong ties to Moscow. This de facto 50-50 division is the perfect ground for Russian propaganda to promote the Kremlin's agenda here, much as it happened in Ukraine. The cameras are off at RTR Moldova, a channel based in Chisinau. The Moldovan government has withdrawn its broadcast license, along with 5 other Russian-language channels. The official justification is that these channels illegally broadcast programming produced in Russia, but the unspoken reason is different. They are accused of being the hand of the Kremlin in Moldova. Employees at the channel criticize that decision and say it leaves a large part of the population without content that is impossible to create in Moldova because of a lack of advertising revenue.
The content from Russia that we broadcast is traditional for many Moldovan viewers. There are many people here who are Russian-speaking, and they really like these programs that are impossible to produce here.
The closure of these channels has reopened the debate over freedom of expression during wartime. The authorities responsible for this blackout have been blunt in stating their reasons.
Well, freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom to disinform. We looked at how certain TV stations reported before the war. Prior to the war, we noticed that a group of media stations prepared this attack on Ukraine. It was an informational preparation and justification for the aggression that was to come.
Mikhail Serkeli is one of the best-known political news YouTubers in the country. In his opinion, the now suspended TV channels are Putin's loudspeakers in Moldova.
Of course, you have to choose. There is a freedom of speech from one side, and from another side there is a security of the country, security of the nation. They are promoting the hatred against Ukraine. They are promoting Russian general line of politics.
Others believe that the suspension of these Russian-speaking channels is an attack against press freedom. That is the view of GRT TV, a channel in the southern region of Gagauzia that broadcasts in Russian, Romanian and Gagauz, the local language that has not been closed.
It is difficult to state that this is freedom of speech when certain people in power try through their influence to press or somehow dictate something. That is why I think there is no freedom of speech.
Moldova has joined countries in Europe in banning Russian propaganda channels, but having such a large Russian-speaking population, the debate in this country goes much deeper. For Ricardo Marquina in Chisinau, Moldova, Jonathan Spear, VOA News.
Fighting fake news and dispelling Russian false information has become something of a crusade for a group of social media activists across Lithuania and other Baltic countries. We go back to Alexei Kovalenko with more.
In the epic battle against Russian disinformation, it seems only fitting that the citizens taking on Kremlin-backed trolls call themselves elves. Thousands of people in Lithuania and the other Baltic states are working to dispel false narratives online, often working anonymously. The founder of this unique civic movement is Rikardas Savukynas.
People started calling trolls Russian propaganda. So who fights against Russian propaganda? Of course, elves. So this name started to be used, elves.
The group became especially active after 2014 and the revolution in Ukraine, when protesters demanded the country move closer to the European Union. But to this day, most of the organization members don't know each other. But the Elves movement isn't just focused on Ukraine. Viktor Danisenko, a Vilnius University professor and expert on Russian propaganda, says the Kremlin is also trying to affect the Baltic countries' media landscape.
From quite small group of 10 or 20 people, it grew to even not only Lithuanian movement, because I know that today elves also exist in Latvia, in Estonia, in Finland, I think so, and in other countries.
Lithuanian parliament member Jurgita Sezionien started working with the elves during the COVID-19 pandemic. The elves identify misinformation or fake accounts they can link to Russian troll farms. The elves then band together online and mass report the sites until moderators respond and remove the fake news. A medical professional by training, Sezionien started countering COVID-related propaganda mostly around vaccinations. But after Russia invaded Ukraine, her focus changed. She commonly takes on false narratives.
Nazism in Ukraine, that Russia is freeing Ukraine, I mean all those war issues and topics, and also human rights.
Savukynas says Russian disinformation in Lithuania ramped up in the second half of 2021 and was probably linked to Russia's preparations to invade Ukraine. He says that today he finds fewer and fewer so-called vatniks, people who believe the Kremlin's disinformation.
When you see real things, what is going on in Ukraine, those killings, those mass killings, rapings, torturing of children, like in Bucha, you understand that Russian propaganda is simply kind of lies.
As the Russian invasion of Ukraine enters its second year, experts estimate as many as 22,000 activists are part of the Elves movement. For Alexei Kovalenko, Arash Arabasadi, VOA News, Washington.
Dive deeper into the situation in Ukraine on our website, voanews.com. That's all for now. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at VOA News. Follow me on Twitter at ELETV1. Catch up on past episodes with our free streaming service, VOA+. I'm Elizabeth Lee in Washington. We'll see you next week for The Inside Story.